A lot of the problems that we see today within our foreign policy stems from the fact that we are a government that has apathetic individuals, psychopaths, sociopaths, uh, probably drug addicts and sexual uh, abusers of children and whatnot. You know, the worst of the worst in terms of the human condition. And at the same time, our allies, such as those in the Middle East specifically, the Gulf, which is Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, of course, are led by religious psychopaths and uh, secular uh, monsters who are using nationalism and religious extremism as a way to dictate uh, hegemony in the region. And, you know, I'm not going to be, this video is basically not really talking about the situation in Ukraine, although that's a whole nother video, um, or the situation elsewhere. I think specifically in the Middle East because it has a dual-edged sword, and that is the religious history behind it, as well as the secular history behind it as well. And Israel touts two uh, sides of this theological debate, in that you have a number of people within the Likud party and within the Labor Party that are religiously inclined, and those who are not affiliated with any religion at all. The United States, which is basically a secular country, are led by individuals who claim to be Christian who are not. They only use that shield because it's appropriate. They want you to believe that what they're doing was ordained by God. Does anyone here really think that Donald Trump or Joe Biden, Barack Obama, or George Bush Jr. are pious Christians? I could tell you that they're not. Um, Due to my own menial understanding of monotheism, which I studied well before 9/11, uh, testifies to the fact that I think that these individuals who are running our government are anything but pious. Their own actions serve against the interests of all the prophets and all the apostles involved with the latter monotheism, such as Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. The name of the video is the Saul Alinsky quote: "The action is in the reaction." And so, is the United States the purveyor of the social ills around the world? No, it's not. But a majority of it is from the United States' own actions. You cannot have hegemony when you have human constructs, ideologies that are always in a constant state of internal strife. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and of course, the skin tones of black, white, yellow, orange, and whatnot. These were all not born of you. You're not born of these ideologies. You're taught to them. And they have the one universal alignment that is non-broken, and that is that they're divisive. Now, on top of it, you have the human condition, which is the primitive state of primordial man, which is in all of us, but we have to evolve past it. And it seems that we haven't, not by much anyway. And that is the base core of our primitive side, that we have to stay in groups to survive. And that is not really the case. I mean, we all share the one common bond, and that is we're all human beings. And that's enough. You don't need to be called black. You don't need to be called white or a Democrat or a Republican or a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian or sexism or any other isms that are involved with the human atmosphere, because they're all irrelevant, right? And they're separate from, say, spiritualism. They're separate from culture. They're separate from the human community. We can all exist as one, but we just have to get rid of the divisiveness and the problems that come with it. And there are a multitude of problems. But let's keep it simple in this video. So the issue is basically that our actions here in the United States when it comes to government has a negative reaction to it most of the time. I mean, if you're just going to blame Hamas for what's going on in Gaza currently, you are missing the plot. If you're going to denigrate Hamas, you have to denigrate the Israeli military, who are basically killing far more people than Hamas ever could as a response. And if your response basically is, well, we see that the Palestinians themselves have voted in Hamas in their own government to represent them. So that means that everybody is guilty. This is a generalization. Well, don't complain when a terrorist action is visited upon us in return, because we voted for the government that is currently destroying the Middle East, not just Gaza, but Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, Sudan, Pakistan, Yemen. The actions of this government, including the funding of terrorists in Syria to overthrow the Assad regime, will have a negative backlash, a negative reverberation of effects. And one of them is international terrorism as a response to our own preconceived terrorism initially. And we as a human community have voted in for the problems at hand. This is the reason why I make videos saying don't vote. Don't become part of the problem, become part of the solution. If the government is for the people, by the people, then we are the government. And I can tell you right now that a majority of the United States citizenry is not as apathetic or sociopathic or psychopathic as the government currently. I mean, yes, we have a violent problem here in the States. It goes back a couple of centuries. I mean, we become so desensitized to school shootings that now we're just saying, when's the next one? Instead of, rectifying the problem, which is basically catering to the needs of the people and solidifying the family itself, the nuclear family. Now, there's a lot of good that comes from classic liberalism. There's a lot of good that comes from classic conservatism, but there's a happy medium. We don't need conservatism. We don't need liberalism. We need the human community to basically come as one unit and basically be afforded the necessary things, the necessary daily things that can help us in our lives. Proper education, proper medical care, proper economic advancements, opportunity. And we don't have to worry about the stresses of life of making the next rent payment or the next car payment or paying a subprime loan on the interest behind it, or basically borrowing from the bank at an interest rate that is, from the La Cosa Nostra itself. And of course, our own mental health, which is an unforeseen, which is an unacknowledged problem here in the States, especially after COVID and what it did to us psychologically. The issues regarding our own government is that it's twofold. You have the Democrats and the Republicans who have various indifferences when it comes to domestic issues, but they all basically are universally solidified when it comes to geopolitics, one of them being Israel. And you have to wonder, the conspiracies that are abound. What does Israel have on the United States? And they don't necessarily need to have anything. Just remember, Israel doesn't control the United States, but they influence them. It's not as simple as black and white. Does the United States control Israel? Not really. But they do major a wide influence. They need us for our military because Israel cannot fight Iran on its own. And why is Iran an enemy in the first place? Well, you have to, study the background of, Israel and Iran, and you'll see that there's faults on both sides. Why can't cooler heads prevail? Instead, we're basically approving of people like to represent us, like Joe Biden, sleepy Joe Biden, a mummy that Lon Chaney could never live up to, or the imbecile Donald Trump himself and his very flat wig, a sexual pervert and a narcissist. Uh, Basically has foolhardily um, manipulated his own base into thinking that he's anti-war and he's for us challenging the establishment. Meanwhile, he gave the Epstein files to a bunch of has-been nobodies on YouTube, like libs of TikTok and DJ Drano. And can you imagine taking that seriously? Well, don't worry. The investigation into 9/11 and into Epstein will never be solved as long as we have a government that is guilty of, you know, hiding the fact that there's a lot more pertaining to the September 11th attacks and also to the Epstein case where both sides are guilty as folk. Do you really think that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are not on that Lolita Express at one point or another? Then you have powerful world leaders and lawyers uh, who are basically enticed by the sexual perversions of young girls themselves. Hey, look, guys, it's not black and white. It's very complex. And this is the reason why a lot of people give up and they think that the world's problems are too complex, too big for them to handle. And then on top of it, the government and the intelligence services and those who are influenced by these two institutions are basically telling you, yeah, it's too big for you. Leave it up to us to investigate on your behalf. Meanwhile, we can't trust these people. We never could. So what's the goal here? Well, the goal, the response to it is to not engage in government in the government's own malfeasance by supporting them. Stop giving them money. Stop giving them your vote. Stop looking at yourselves like you're the enemy. The people in Yemen, the people in Libya, the people in Syria, the people in Iraq, the people in Afghanistan are no different than you. Yes, they speak a different language. Yes, they're a different skin tone, but they're just like you. They're human beings. And if we can't get along with people who look different than us and sound different than us, then how do you expect to get along with anybody else? You can't even get along with yourself. You suffer from post traumatic stress disorder, depression, severe bouts of anger. Why is this happening to me? The bigger question is, why not you? And how do you respond under pressure? I have my own problems and I'm trying to figure them out, even though at the age of 55. So I'm not without fault here. I'm not saying that I'm this perfect person. I come to you as a flawed human being. But one thing I'd like to help out with society is by doing these videos is to educate people into thinking, using your own cognitive thought, and also by informing you with prima facie evidence and information that helps strengthen you. Because the one thing that this channel prides itself on is that by talking about 9/11 and talking about, global issues, geopolitics and whatnot, that we hold certain people accountable through the court of law. Now, you may say, well, the law is against us. Well, it's not about whether we're going to be successful or not. It's about the fucking effort. And if we don't give an effort, then we can't say that it's going to be unsuccessful or successful if you don't even try. How can you walk if you haven't taken the first step? So, I mean, I've done previous videos regarding this playlist itself, and I talked about the repercussions, what I feel is going to happen. Well, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you start bombing people out of non-existence and opportunity, there's only one thing left, and that's revenge. And revenge is a dish best served cold. Now, I'm not also going to say I approve of this revenge because violence begets violence. And I think the solution is to basically stop looking at yourselves as the enemy. I'm talking about here in the United States. Now, if you may see somebody who's a socialist or who identifies as a communist, or who identifies as a Catholic, who identifies as a Muslim, who identifies as a male, a female, but not non-binary, all of this is irrelevant. It's meant to confuse us, to manipulate us. There's a war for your mind, a psychological war brought on by the intelligence services and the military industrial complex and the United States government. Why? Because they need you to fight against each other. And the winner is going to be the government, not you. So the conservatives right now who are beating down the Democrats, well, yes, you can beat them down. And yes, you might win, but you'll be beaten up to enough to make yourself weak and without numbers to combat the real enemy, which is the federal government. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Grassley, um, Tom Cotton, Brian Mast, Lindsey Graham, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. These are my sworn enemies. They don't represent me. And I sure will never represent them. I condemn these people for what they've done, not to just people abroad, but to people here at home. You take a look at your big city streets, especially in blue and red states. You red states, you talk about the blue states. Yes, I live in New York, and yes, we got problems. But you take a look at your own private ghettos. Now, they're not ghettos like here in the blue states, right? But your ghettos are basically desolate wastelands where there's a lot of biological and chemical waste, economic deprivation. Some of the poorest states in the union are red states. Yes, blue states are richer, New York and California specifically. But the right money is in the wrong hands. And so I would suggest to you, if you ever watch this video, and I'm a small channel, but I think you need to pull out the proverbial IV out of your arm and say, I'm not playing this game anymore. And that you need to basically look at yourselves as a higher elevated being. What does that mean? A higher elevated being, human being. Yes, we're higher elevated in terms of looking at other life forms, such as insects or animals. This is the reminder by a God, even though I'm atheist, but I believe that there could be a higher power. And I don't believe in the monotheistic gods. I don't believe in like the heaven and hell that most Muslims, Jews, and Christians believe. But I do believe that there's a higher elevation, a higher elevated intelligence that's out there that created it. I think that makes sense. I'm not a hardcore anti-theist, I used to be, but you know, the insects and animals are a reminder of how we should treat one another, and also at the same time of how much advanced we are in terms of life forms. But but most of the time, it looks like we don't even we're not even that much advanced more than a cockroach, right? But it's funny because when you think about it, do animals kill each other for pleasure? No, they don't. There's a purpose behind it. Well, is there a purpose in killing each other? Is there a purpose? There's a reason why they're against immigration. There's a reason why they're against the Second Amendment, because what they see the United States as is a prime candidate for them to rule over a country that is basically the superpower of the world, and having a uninformed, uneducated, unhealthy public that can never rise up against it and threaten its existence. Orwell said something about it in 1984, that if you want a vision of the future, imagine a human boot stamping on a human face forever. How far off are we from that scenario? Not to sound all doom and gloom, that there is hope. And that's one thing I'm also working on myself, because I'm a hopeless pessimist, but that's improving a little bit here and there. Not as fast as I'd like it, but that I am reminded through my own job and what I do, that I do see the good in people, that there are little bits of good. Now, you may not see it on viral media. I mean, on YouTube and Twitter, you see all these doom and gloom videos of, leave the United States, we're getting poorer, there's no jobs, women are to blame for everything, that the men are basically just, good for money grabs, and, all of this, very one-sided, trivial nonsense, that the answers to a lot of these questions are easily obtainable. Some not, but it needs an effort. But that doesn't mean that we have to give up. And so I leave it like this, that if we're to wait for a terroristic response to the government's own violent actions toward the Middle East, then we're not going to live. I think what we need to do is basically show the rest of the world that we're not anything like the government. We're far different, and we're willing to stand up against it. And guess what? I'll be right there on the front lines with you. Thank you very much for tuning into the video, everybody. Take care and have a great weekend.